Mahal by Toro Y Moi. It is 13 songs, 40 minutes long. His first LP since his last LP was Outer Peace in 2019, I believe. Don't really count some of the other things that he's done, but
Yeah.
we have reviewed Toro Y Moi extensively on this podcast. We've both listened to him for a decade plus, so
And Toro Y Moi's
artist
like
we're very familiar with.
he's one of the founders of, I mean, like inadvertently he founded like this whole like chill wave thing that was talked about in the early 2010s, but inadvertently he's become kind of the grandfather of modern indie in the sense that a lot of indie artists now are taking cues, little hits from stuff that Toro Y Moi did 8 years ago. And it's getting to the point now where, as someone like Toro Y Moi, you are now coming to music and you're coming to an art form in a genre that has copied you. It has copied you endlessly, incessantly, to the point where it almost like, well, I'll take our example of Rex Orange County, our favorite like punching bag, but like example of like, he made an album that was a pretty phenomenal indie album, but it was still feels like we haven't left that, what was the name of that tour? The Anything in Return era, so to speak.
Yeah, the 2013 era, exactly.
Yeah, and of course, there's Toro Y Moi's other alter egos, like Les Sens, for example. He's a prolific musician and has made a ton of stuff on this. And so it is going to be, whether it's his fault or not, a challenge for him to also not just reinvent his own sound, but like put it out in a way that continually doesn't seem to feel like everything else is already around him. It's not his fault that the entire genre has copied him, but that's where it is.
And like with Outer Peace, that album grew on me. It's one of my favorite Toro Y Moi records now, of that record that came out in 2019. I think with that one, he did really well. And this one, he pivots and, is still trying to still trying to push his sound further and further. I think with this record, to me, this is one of the most complete Toro Y Moi records in a way, because a complaint that we both have of a lot of his work is we'll get like 7 or 8 really fantastic, amazing tracks, which we'll listen to for the rest of our lives. And then you have a lot of random throwaway stuff that you don't really need. With Mahal, it's actually, there are a couple like pretty good songs in here, but the main theme of the whole record is all of them actually go well together. It tells a story. It actually goes well, and there's no little filler things at all with it. But there's no like crazy bangers that he normally has. So it's very interesting the way it sounds. It's stripped back a little bit. It's definitely experimental. Like there's a lot of different sounds, a lot of different things and motifs that he's thrown in there. But it's still like tried and true Toro Y Moi. Like as I want to, when I've listened to this, I've probably listened to this 3 or 4 times now. I'm slowly want to call this the greatest hipster elevator music in the world. That's kind of what I want to label this as. But as like a full album, it's actually pretty good. And for Toro Y Moi, I'm impressed with it in a way because so many people have copied him. He's been in the indie scene for 2008, 2009, so for a very long time. And his compatriots, some of them, keep making the same sound, like Washed Out. I think can sometimes sound washed out every once in a while, like no pun intended. Neon Indian just doesn't make enough music and stuff. He's probably the most experimental out of all of them, but he doesn't really do much. He's going to release an album this year at some point, but more on that whenever that happens. But Toro Y Moi has released a shit ton of music, and for that, like, really respect him. And every album is slowly getting better and better and better, and Mahal is definitely one of those that I like a lot now.
Really fast before we get in, I just fully agree with you. I feel like this as an album is the most complete Toro Y Moi album, but whereas in earlier records, I could pull like Say That's Your Banger, or any of the other ones.
That's your banger, or like there's so many exactly.
Maybe it'll grow on me, but I'm not seeing any of those here yet. However, there are times where
some good songs.
Yeah, they're great songs, and the album plays through really nicely. It has a nice motif of like this old like beater car that you're trying to rev up that like all of a sudden turns into these like really sonic, interesting like synthesizer wave type deal. Like it's a really cool motif that you get throughout the album that really unites the songs and brings them together. And it makes for a more pleasant, like, listening to a Toro Y Moi album experience than I've had in a while, as opposed to listening to a Toro Y Moi album and going, all right, I'm going to take this one for my playlist, and this one for my playlist, and this one for my playlist, and these are bangers I'm going to listen to the rest of my life. But the rest of the album, just like, missing that stuff. So it's a different balance, a different mix. And the last thing I'll also add is that the motif that he chooses is a sort of callback to smooth jazz in a way, because a lot of these tracks break down into that or have these sort of jazzy, not even quite blues or soul, but strictly, not even quite funk, but strictly jazz kinds of motifs in the back, which I like.
Funk.
Yeah. Definitely emphasis on the jazz, less so the funk. I like because that's your little indie touch doing something a little bit different away from everyone else in the genre. But let's 100%. Go in. I start with the medium with Toro Y Moi, Unknown Mortal Orchestra. Unknown Mortal Orchestra, I know words, they're a great sort of indie project that's been really good at collaborating, really accentuating the production of the stuff they've worked on lately, and I love their collaborative projects. It's really nice, and it starts off the album really well.
It's a really cool track where it's like it's a really cool instrumental track that opens up the album. I love the guitar part and everything. I think it's a really interesting collab, and it sets off the record of, oh wow, this is going to be interesting sounding. And then Goes By So Fast and Magazine with featuring Salami Rose, Joe Louis, that's a name, are two like good chill songs to kind of set you up, but it like flows through the record. I was like, oh, this is it's stripped back compared to a lot of Toro Y Moi we've gotten the past decade, but it's still like experimental and weird and different in that regard. And then you have Postman, which I really love this song.
Really?
That's where you really get your jazz funk, I'm going to call it now.
Postman, because like that was one of the first singles that came out along with Magazine, and it's one of those things where, like, I'm glad I didn't judge the album, but like this album by the singles, because Magazine is really that song that kind of carries and is a moment in the album. Yes. And then Postman is one of those necessary transitions that you need to just like make the rest of the album work, because it's one of those like throwaway stream of consciousness Toro Y Moi songs where he's almost like this innocent boyish child. Hey, Mr. Postman, no mail for me. Aw, sad day. Bye bye. Like that kind of deal does not translate into any sort of like other way or context, but helps this album move along, because the transition between Magazine and The Loop sets this album up for like more of a ride than it ultimately is. This is still your Toro Y Moi chill kind of like cruise type deal. So you need songs like Postman. I'd even include like Deja Vu and Way Too Hot in there as well to kind of break things up a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And like, because with that, the way that it connects the records together, because that's when you really get to that jazzy part. You know, you have Mississippi Last Year, which really get into that jazz motif. And Last Year's a fantastic track. And that's where, to me, I really started to get appreciation for it. And then you got down to Clarity, which is, I don't know if that might be my favorite song on the record, so that or Way Too Hot. Those are the two tracks. Just with the way they're done, it's like, oh, he really is trying to, keep reinventing his sound, trying to still update it and do what he can, but stay true to himself as a musician, which is one of the hardest things to do, especially in indie. Like the scene in indie, which I've on ad nauseum is they need to have some other sound. Like they need a lot of artists need to get different ideas and pull from different genres and stuff that they haven't before, and you get that in Mahal. Of course, and you get Deja Vu, which is like this. I like Deja Vu too. It's like this really trippy, almost Jimi Hendrix-esque track with the way the guitar works out and everything. And I really like that. It's like full, like psychedelic. Totally throws the album off a little bit for a second, but it still fits.
You get a lot of the psychedelic energy in that latter half of the album in general.
Yes.
You got it in Clarity.
Way
you
Too
get
Hot.
It Deja Vu. Yeah, and it's like, I guess I was trying to put my hand on it. It felt a little bit like Thousands alternative, like like our bread and butter, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
but,
like like Tame Impala, like early Tame Impala style.
Yeah, but it's also worth mentioning. Like, I mean, I even heard some things that sounded like early, like OK Computer era, like Amnesiac era Radiohead, just by the way the guitar was going in it. And I was realizing, oh right, that was all meant to be a callback to like Pink Floyd and 70s and 80s, like psychedelic rock and alternative as well. So the DNA runs through this very well. That's for sure.
Yep. I think it ends very well with Millennium and Days in Love, and again, it's a great record. It's the most complete Toro Y Moi project to date, and I'm very impressed with him. Again, I'm glad I did not judge it by just Postman, because I've heard that track a lot, and I was like, I have no idea what the fuck this record's going to be. And then I saw like little snippets from KCRW. They had this little live session with him. I was like heard like 30 seconds of, I forget what track it was. It might have been Magazine, but I was like, oh, okay, let's see what we get. And yeah, it's really good. It's one of those records now where I'm just gonna listen to it as a record. There's might be tracks here or there, maybe like Way Too Hot and Deja Vu that I'll listen to by themselves, and a couple others, but it's an experience that needs to be compounded with at least a couple other tracks within the record.
100%. I think it's a good album to just like play through. A lot of people, even non-musically inclined people, just because indie music has become this, they love when I just throw on a Toro Y Moi thing. It's just really easy for me, really easy for them. It's a great crowd pleaser for like a particular indie kind of crowd. And yeah, I think this will be another one. Really solid, really chill. I think some people might criticize, oh, where are the bangers? Like, where are the hits, so to speak? But like, sure, that's maybe a totally valid criticism. But at least to me, as a music reviewer, I've seen Toro Y Moi basically invent and reinvent the genre of indie. So much so that most of the other artists in this genre are, the good ones, are taking it and making it their own way. That's what indie's really about. But bog's standard basic indie still sounds like Toro Y Moi from 2013. And to me, that's an achievement. Like the entire, like 75% of an entire genre is chasing what I did 10 years ago. I don't need bangers. I am the grandfather. And so like...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's not getting Uncle Indie either.
Yeah, I mean, this is... if we keep up in this direction, I can see it for sure. But I think... I think right now, this is an example of him trying some new things, taking some risks he probably wouldn't have taken with his career when he still needed to establish things before. And I like that for the sake of music. Arbitrary scale. Free speech. Sean, you want to go this time?
Yeah. This is Jesus. Everything I want to say will get bleeped. So
go on.
I'll say no. This is just me being able to do this podcast and say more or less what I want to say.
Oh, so it's a
just like
considering what we've said on the 212 episodes of Audioface, some of which has gone through a lot of scrutiny. I'd say it's a pretty amount of free speech. Yeah. This is, for me, this is going to be me arguing at one of those like hot dog stands, or like, you know, one of those like food carts you see at night in the city, like after sporting events or games, whatever. And that's me arguing with the price of a pupusa. So one of the ladies in the cart saying, no, it's my free speech to pay $3 for your $4 pupusas. You're impinging on my freedom of speech by charging me more money than I want to pay on those pupusas.
Yes.